He played his part in that massacre. He should be in a straitjacket and a muzzle for the rest of his days.
I think he should just be hanged. Clearly, he's just some right-wing extremist. But I'm reading their books. This book literally says you can marry prepubescent children. They don't care that Islamists are raping children. We need another bloodless revolution in this country. 100 churches have been burnt down and attacked in Canada. Trudeau's response to this was, I think it's wrong, but it's understandable. Even Muslims will tell you Islam is not a race. People have looked at children being raped and they're not in prison.
Let's remind people that was Hugh Edwards.
Yeah. If you're against slavery, you'll oppose Sharia law. If you're against child marriage, you'll oppose Sharia law. If you're against these kinds of things, whether you want to be or not, you're on my side. The question is whether you've just got the balls and the backbone to admit it to yourself and get involved. We all know that there's a growing problem of Islamization and Islamists in the UK. But if we can't even talk about that, how are we going to start dealing with the solutions?
How do we define a miracle?
It's something that cuts across the grain of natural cause and effect.
Are you saying there's a chance my hair might grow back? I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors, Gold Seal. I use their products every single day, and now I finally get to work with them. I use their products for anti-inflammatory, reduced anxiety, better sleep, and mental clarity. I'm going to put a link to their website in the description, along with a 10% discount code for you to take advantage of. Go and have a look at their website, see if there's anything in there for you. I hope you enjoy this week's episode, and good health. Bob.
Liam.
How are you?
I'm recovering from a flu, so I apologise. I probably just made you ill.
But
make sure you wash your hands.
But you're here for the cause.
I am.
Which is the main thing. Our Easter special.
Yes.
You was our special guest for our Christmas special.
Yep.
And I couldn't have asked a better person to come and celebrate Christmas on the podcast with us and explain the Christmas story. And now we're going to do the same with Easter. So first and foremost, happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you as well. Christ is risen.
Yeah, it seems to be, and bearing in mind, people watching and listening, I'm atheist, but I'm all for the resurrection of Christian values.
Amen.
I'm even getting my terminology.
And we'll probably dig into that a bit later on, I think.
We will. I want to cover the Easter story so I get a better understanding of it, because like I'm sure most people in the UK, they've grown up as Christians. They read the Bible in school, but they've not really carried on with much. And if you was to actually ask someone, well, what is the Easter story?
Yeah.
Me included, I wouldn't know. I just enjoy celebrating my time with family, eating chocolate, having a few pints of Guinness, listening to music. And it's a bit like Christmas for me. It's another cause for celebration, and I'm all for that. But I want to talk about the cancellation of Easter as well. And then we'll cover good versus evil and all the madness that's going on in the world, because I know you've got your political eye on current affairs and Speaker's Corner. But let's start with the purpose of today, what we're here for. It's Easter. What is the Easter story? What does Easter mean to you?
That's a great question and a great way in. And I just got to say, just you know, I really enjoyed doing the Christmas special, and I've been looking forward to the opportunity of doing this, because for Christians, Easter is more important than Christmas. Actually, the Easter Sunday is the highest, most important day in the Christian calendar. It surpasses Christmas by a mile.
I had no idea.
Yeah. It is. It's the holiest day of the Christian year, and it is the pinnacle of everything that we believe in. And what it means for me is it means the ultimate victory of our God. It means the ultimate victory of Christ over sin, the world, and the devil. So that's what it means to me. And do you want me to tell the kind of the meaning of Easter and
summarise like you did with the Christmas story?
Yeah.
You gave a real nice overview of actually what the Christmas story was. So what part of history are we celebrating here? Yeah,
so we're celebrating the end of Christ's life, in a sense,
right,
and the beginning of a new life. And so what happened 2,000 years ago is that after a short period of ministry that was done by our Lord through the Roman province of Israel, Christ was eventually arrested, on trumped-up charges, imprisoned, tortured, and then in quick succession, executed. And he was executed by the most humiliating, gruesome, and painful means of torture known to the Roman world, which was crucifixion, where you essentially are nailed to a cross, and you're left to basically suffocate. You suffocate to death. That's how you die from crucifixion. And you may have your eyes plucked out by crows while you for good measure and stuff like that. And it's an undisputable fact that Christ died 2,000 years ago. There's non-Christian testimony talking about the crucifixion. There's Christian testimony talking about crucifixion. It's just the most established fact that we can know about Jesus and possibly about anyone from that period of time, that Jesus died on a cross.
Here's a question I never ever thought I'd ask anybody.
Yeah.
What trumped up charges was Jesus arrested for? It obviously wasn't a social media post.
It wasn't a social media post, no. But he was on trumped up charges. He was accused of blasphemy before the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish highest authority. But then when he was taken before Pontius Pilate, he was thrown as someone who was declaring himself as king and as an enemy of Caesar, which was like the highest crime in the Roman world. So, like they tried to nail him on two different charges, depending on who he was in front of. Blasphemy, and this man makes himself a king, and that makes him an enemy of Caesar, and so it was both political and religious charges that he was crucified under.
Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
And when he was under arrest, was that where, before he was crucified?
Yes.
Is that where he was tortured with the cat o' nine tails?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess, have you seen The Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ?
I went to the cinema to watch that film when it came out.
Yeah.
And I remember watching it thinking, well, this is graphic. No one could stand, tolerate, survive that level of torture. And as we've left the cinema, there's evangelists outside preaching the Bible.
Yeah.
And they asked me what I thought about the film. I said, well, I thought it was completely far-fetched. Nobody could tolerate or stand that kind of violence and torture. But the evangelist said to me, actually, it was far worse than that.
Well, I wouldn't say it was far worse. I thought Mel Gibson pretty much did a fair job of, revealing just how gruesome it was. You know, the whip that was used on the Christ was filled with bones and razors and sharp things. The point of the whip is that it was meant to dig into your flesh and rip it open and expose it, you know. And so the whipping, the spitting, the crown of thorns, and then, you know, the actual crucifixion, you know, of being like raised up on the cross. All of that was pretty accurate. I thought the bit where they crucified him the wrong way and then took him out and re-crucified him, that's neither biblical nor accurate. But the level of violence that you saw in Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ is actually, I would say, pretty accurate.
About right.
About right.
I'm gonna have to revisit that film then. What was the crown of thorns in aid of?
Well, this is the point, is that he was accused of making himself a king. And because he was accused of making himself a king, one of the way that the Romans and the gods mocked him was to dress him in a purple robe and then place a crown of thorns upon his head, you know. And the reason for that was that they were mocking his so-called claims to kingship,
right?
You know, something that Christ admitted before Pilate. You know, it's like my king, but he said that my kingdom is not of this world. And so he dies on the cross, and then 3 days later, on Sunday, his followers start to see him again. They start to have what are known as resurrection appearances. They see Jesus. They see him. Some of his followers see him in the garden surrounding the tomb where he was buried. Others see him in Jerusalem. Others see him in Galilee. You know, and he appears in locked rooms. And these experiences are what gives birth to the church. It's what gives birth to the Christian faith. So to set the scene, if I may, I'm just going to read
please do.
a passage. This is from 1 Corinthians 15. And the passage that I'm going to quote, Paul, who's the writer of the letter, is quoting some kind of Christian hymn or some kind of Christian creed that predates the writing of his letter. Paul probably wrote Corinthians maybe 20 years into his career. So that means that this is earlier than that, and this letter was written 20 years after the events. But the creed or the hymn that he's quoting is before that, which means that we've got a source here that's extremely early historically, right? And it says this: "Now I make known to you, brethren, the gospel which I preached to you, which also you received, in which also you stand. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins, according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day, according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, and that he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. When he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me." And so these appearances of a man that people knew was dead is the historical grounding upon which Christianity is based. But it's part of a much more cosmological story, which is the Easter story. And so now, if I may, I'm just going to explain what that cosmological story is. And I'm going to use an analogy, right? I know you're into health and fitness, so I'm going to use a health and fitness analogy. You know that if a person chooses to live on a diet that's high fat, high saturates, high sugars, it's not going to be long before that starts impacting their health, and it's not going to be long before that leads them to an early grave. Yeah, if someone's drinking, smoking, eating lots of burgers, eating lots of donuts, not really doing exercise, that reality, that has a consequence structured into nature. It's just there. It's a law. If you behave a certain way, it has a consequence, right? Well, that also, we Christians also believe that is true of our souls. That sin causes death, causes spiritual death, just like eating lots of bad food can lead to heart disease, cancer, and death, right? And in the Christian faith, we believe that humanity has been addicted to sin, and that sin, that failure to live to the glory of God, has resulted in death and destruction working its way out into the world, into creation. And we see that, in wars and in the way, and famines, and in the way that we leave children abandoned and abused, and, and the way that people abuse themselves.
There's a lot of people self-harming.
Exactly. Right? And this sin has a consequence. It is death. So we are diseased as a species.
Is sin another word for dopamine?
No. Sin.
I probably worded that wrong.
Go on.
People are turning to the wrong thing for dopamine, which is sinful.
Much better.
They're turning to porn for a quick fix.
Yes.
They're gambling for a quick fix.
You got it.
They're using stuff to clock out, which is detrimental to their health. Therefore, the sinning they're doing, they probably don't even realise it, but it's eroding them internally.
Yes.
Their soul.
Yes. And it leads to death. It leads to a terminal illness, right? Now, going back to the food analogy, right? If someone ends up with heart disease, one of the ways that you can solve it is you can give them a heart transplant. Yeah. Now, our souls, which are diseased by sin, have heart disease, and Christ offers himself up as a donor so that we can have a new heart. But obviously, as a donor, he has to give up his own life. And in his death upon the cross, he gives to us our heart, which we receive when we believe upon his resurrection. And that new heart is reorientated towards God. And that means that the disease is put into remission. You've still got to deal with the consequences of your sin. You know, if you've got a porn addiction, still got to deal with it. If you've got a drug addiction, still got to deal with it. If you're cheating on your wife, still got to deal with it. But now that you have a life orientated towards God, you're going to start dealing with it. You're going to start making the change. And so the disease is put into remission, and we become increasingly healthy the more we press into Christ. And this is what Christ is achieving at his resurrection. So he's offering himself in sacrifice. It's a bit like a soldier who, in his troop, chucks himself onto the grenade. He sacrifices himself to save the rest of his troop. His death is the life for everyone else.
So have I got this right then? The purpose of Easter, the deeper meaning of Easter, beyond eating chocolate until you're sick, and also having a lovely
time. We can maybe come on to a bit of the customs and culture about that,
Yeah, 100%. And obviously spending lovely, precious time with the ones you love the most.
Amen.
The more deeper meaning is that it's a time to reflect on your gratitude, know what you're grateful for, and appreciate the fact that you've got an opportunity to start again and start dealing with things that may be a problem in your life.
That's a response to Easter. The meaning of Easter is that Christ has won the victory over those problems in your life.
Okay, so that's what we're celebrating.
That's what we're celebrating, is that Christ has defeated sin.
If you didn't believe in Christ, what else can you celebrate to keep it in line with Christian values? Because not everyone's going to buy into the whole God theory or Jesus, which is fine, like me. But I pride myself on Christian values, which is, maybe that's an oxymoron, I don't know. But if someone doesn't want to celebrate
the resurrection,
the actual resurrection of Jesus Christ, what can they celebrate so they don't feel like they're fooling themselves? What can we give to them people? What can you give to me? I'll be celebrating it and I'll be full of gratitude and love anyway, but just so some people can make a little bit more sense of it if they don't believe, or at this moment they don't believe.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people find God at different times, don't they?
Well, exactly. It's a tough one, Liam, because genuinely, if you're not celebrating the resurrection, you're not celebrating Easter. But what you can do is still celebrate Christ's contribution. You can celebrate, like someone who is a man of goodwill like you are, a non-believer who is supportive of the church. We have a category for you. We actually have a term for you. You're called a man of goodwill.
That's me.
That's you.
I've been going to church since we last saw each other,
exactly.
which I promised.
Thanks be to God.
An atheist going to church, how about that?
It's a good start.
And I told
you're not the only one.
And when I told the vicar, he sort of looked a bit perplexed.
Right.
I said, yep.
Yeah. I mean, if it was a Church of England vicar, he might have been an atheist himself. I mean, who knows? Who knows what the Church of England vicars are like? But the point that I'm making, for men of goodwill and for women of goodwill like yourself, though you don't believe in the resurrection, what you can still celebrate is how Christ has contributed to our civilization, how Christ's teachings have contributed to our civilization, how Christ's example is still an example to us, even if you don't believe. Even just as a man, he is an example to men. And so what you could do is you could just reflect upon him as a man, reflect upon his example, his sacrificial example, this idea that he laid down his life for his friends, which is the very definition of the ultimate sacrifice.
It's not a problem to adopt some of Jesus' principles.
Exactly.
Because we can't, I mean, as an atheist, I firmly believe that Jesus Christ did exist. He was a very powerful, influential man.
Yeah.
So I think adopting some of his principles is surely a good thing.
Yes, and I would say
with or without the belief of God.
Exactly, and I would say that if you see that Jesus to be a good man, it can't hurt you to be a student of him. You know.
Yeah, I can't argue with that.
But I would challenge you. I would challenge you that you need to at some point you need to grapple with this question of the resurrection. Like, and Easter's a good time to do it. Just think about it, because independent of whether you believe in the resurrection or not, right? There are certain base facts that any historian can recognize as true, whether the resurrection occurred or didn't occur. Like, for example, Paul, who was a persecutor of the church, became a Christian. James, who was a doubter in Jesus, became a leader of the church. Jewish Christians, for no Jewish reason at all, started honouring Sunday as an important day. Right? These are not disputable facts. These are just facts. That Christians didn't start venerating the tomb of Jesus, even though the tradition and cultural response in that time would have been to venerate the tomb of a good teacher. Christians didn't start celebrating Christ as some great martyr, which they would have had the cultural conditions to do so. They didn't have the cultural belief in the idea that a single person would be resurrected, but yet they came to that belief. Now these facts that I've laid out, and others besides, they need to be explained. They need to be answered. Why? What happened? What transformed these people? What made them start to behave this way? Because as you know, people behave in certain ways because of life's experiences. Something happens that changes you. Yeah, and you take it's only a moment for you to think about something in your own life, some big event that changed your attitude towards life, that changed your direction in life. Can you think of something like that?
A couple of things, but I don't want to beat the same drum for people that tune into me week in, week out. Finding out my dad wasn't the hero I thought he was.
Right.
That changed the complete direction, my whole internal faith system. 1 minute, your idol's wearing a cape. The next, you look at him like he's scum. I mean, not in the blink of an eye, over a gradual period of time. But, yeah, sons aren't supposed to look at their fathers like they're dog shit. We're supposed to admire, respect, and sort of chase his success and principles for as long as we're on the planet. So that shifted my path.
Now, that's a great example because that gives you a cultural paradigm, i.e., we're supposed to look up to our fathers. We're supposed to chase their success. So you're making a reference to a cultural backdrop there. And then what you're saying is something happened that broke that paradigm for you and made you invert the whole paradigm because of something that you experienced or discovered. Right. Well, the Jews lived in a cultural paradigm in which they didn't believe that single individuals rose from the dead. Though they did believe in a general resurrection, they didn't think that Sundays were special. They didn't see the cross as any particular symbol other than a disgrace, other than a humiliation. And yet something happened that made them suddenly go, actually, a single individual is rose from the dead. And now we're going to honor that on a Sunday. We won't go to his tomb because the tomb is empty. And we're not going to celebrate him as a martyr because he's alive. And we're going to tell everybody that he's risen from the dead. Now, something had to happen to make them think that. Now, I will entertain any theory you want to put on this table. Right? Any conspiracy theory you want to put on the table. Any medical theory you want to put on the table, any philosophical theory, political theory, I'll entertain any theory you want. And on my side, I will put the theory of the resurrection. And then we'll weigh our theories against the evidence. And I am 100% confident that the one that will come out trumps, based on the evidence, is that the resurrection makes sense of these independent facts.
Okay, rather than me give you a theory, and then we're going to move on to the suppression of Easter, supermarkets, schools, in fact, just the whole cultural spectrum in the UK at the moment. But you can understand why a lot of people would find the resurrection of anybody, somebody coming back from the dead. You can understand how a lot of people would find that far-fetched because it's, as far as I know, it's never happened to anybody else since.
Agreed.
So how would you explain that to people, somebody actually coming back from the dead? That's pretty wild.
The assumption that the idea there is that miracles don't happen, right? But there are many examples of miracles documented. You know, the world is filled with miracles. The world is filled with supernatural realities. It's just that we're not exposed to them. And I did a recent teaching in one of the seminars that I run, in which we were talking about miracles, and I asked, okay, who in this room has either experienced a miracle directly, or knows someone directly who has experienced a miracle? About a quarter of the class put their hand up.
How do we define a miracle?
As in something that it's something that cuts across the grain of natural cause and effect.
Are you saying there's a chance my hair might grow back?
I mean, we can chemically make your hair grow back. Like there's literally medicines that can do that.
But is there any chance that there could be a resurrection of my hair?
I think in terms of miracles, what I'm saying, I'm talking about miracles like people who are in wheelchairs. I know someone who was in a wheelchair, was prayed for, and is now walking and talking. And he was in a wheelchair.
Do you think that was do you think he
direct testimony?
Was he crippled physically, or do you think he was psychologically crippled?
He was stabbed in the back.
Okay.
He was stabbed in the back. He was in a gang. He was stabbed in the back. And it cut into the spine, and the linkages were cut off, and he was prayed for, and now he's walking.
And we can put this all down to God.
And that's the point. You see, if there is a God, then miracles are possible, in which case we can believe in we can see the resurrection, right? The resurrection is a miracle that is documented. It's documented right here. I just read you the passage, right? That documents the miraculous claim of the resurrection. Now, you can say things like, it's made up, but then we've got to start examining the evidence. You can say things like, they didn't really know, but then we've got to start examining the evidence. And whatever theory you put on this table, Liam, I'm 100% confident that the resurrection is going to come out the stronger theory backed by the evidence. And so the miracle of the resurrection is a proof to God's existence. And so, and I'd love to do that examination with you. I'd love to do that conversation with you at some point, but I know we've got a lot of other things to talk about. But that is essentially the message of Easter, that Christ has conquered death, that he has conquered sin, and he has conquered the world, and those that live in him have eternal life, are in the kingdom of God, and are bringing the kingdom of God into the world through the way that they live.
Now, no matter what my beliefs are that are different to yours, it's always very, very fascinating talking to you. And
thanks.
It's
checks in the post.
It's also very refreshing, because although I'm not a religious person, I can see the way the country's going. I can see the shift in religion. I can see the shift in culture. I can see the shift, period, the political shift.
Yeah.
And I personally think we're in scary times. We're up shit street at the moment. But sticking with the Easter theme, because this is just one example of many things that's being snatched from our culture. Yeah. And I know that our culture comes from Christianity. I'm aware of that. And I like the foundations Christianity has put in place. I like the guidelines.
Yeah.
I like the moral compass it provides people that are lost without a cause. I'm grateful for Christianity. I've had a lot of friends of mine that have lost their minds and they couldn't grip hold of anything. But when they found Christianity, they did. You could say that for other religions, but I think out of all the religions, Christianity is probably my favourite. And I'd like to see some of that energy put back into the UK with the immediate effect, no more delaying, and you promote muscular Christianity, and that, I believe, is what we need. Men need to be men again, unapologetically. But going back to the suppression of Easter and our God-given principles and values and rights, what we should be, in my opinion, honouring and just be grateful for, that we've actually been handed as a present, a guideline to live your life if you're struggling.
And a heritage and a culture.
Yes.
That is ours.
It's sacred.
Yeah, it's ours. Like, English people say, we've lost our identity. Well, you've got an identity. It's in the Christian faith. You've got a culture. It's in the Christian faith. There you go. You've got one. You've had one for 1,000 years. You've only lost it in the last few hundred. It's time to reclaim it.
People are going to think I'm on the turn.
I'm working on it.
I know you are.
Soon, people, soon.
And the thing is, I'm your mind's like a parachute. It works better when it's open. And that's very much me. I always leave a percentage of my mind and thoughts for doubt. I'm not right all the time. And nobody can be right all the time. And you've got to leave a little bit of space in your brain in case you've called something wrong.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just walk the world as an ignorant kind of moron, really.
Yeah.
You think you're so clever, but you're not. You're stupid. So I like keeping it open. I like the thought that I could have everything wrong, and then I meet interesting people like you, and I build a little relationship with them, and I learn great things. And I think, well, hang about, growing up in a little town somewhere, it only taught me so much. You've got to get out there and listen more, which is why I love doing this. So we agree that Christian culture, at the very least, should rise supreme, but it's not. It's being stamped on. So we've seen a school that have cancelled an element of Easter, and if people think that's too extreme, I'll reword it. We've seen a school in the UK water down and belittle Easter celebrations.
Yep.
I think that's indisputable. It's well documented, which I'm sure you'll cover. And I also want you to touch base on why supermarkets are sort of eliminating Easter. Easter eggs are being changed to
holiday eggs.
Holiday eggs and chocolate eggs. It's like, I don't want chocolate and holiday eggs. I grew up eating Easter eggs, and Easter reminded me of happiness and warmth. Why do you think this is happening, and how on earth can we change that?
Well, the first thing that I would say is immediately, if it doesn't say Easter, don't buy it.
Done.
Right? If it says chocolate eggs, holiday eggs, just leave them on the shelf. And eventually what will happen is the companies will go, we made a loss. Why did we make a loss? We'll talk to some consumers. Why didn't you buy our chocolate egg? And it's like, because you called it a chocolate egg, not an Easter egg.
We can get them all year round, thanks.
Exactly. So starting with the solution first and then coming to the cause of the problem. What is required is that everyone in this country that values the Christian faith starts standing up for it, starts using the fullness of their democratic rights and the fullness of their democratic space to assert their Christian identity. Now, Christians like me are going to do that. And then men of goodwill like you can come in and support us. And we and push for actually, no, we want to maintain our Christian customs. We want to maintain our Christian values. Just as a quick aside, the whole idea of the Easter egg, it's pretty ancient. It's connected to the end of Lent, because obviously Easter comes at the end of Lent. We can't eat eggs during Lent because we go vegan. And so we used to, one of the first things that you did on Easter Sunday was you got an egg, because it was a quick source of protein and it was a way of just marking the end. And then the Dutch came up with this idea of Easter bunnies laying eggs as a game for little children. And that's where that whole custom of Easter eggs and Easter bunnies comes from. It's just a 16th, 17th century Dutch tradition that went global because of the Americans. And then it got chocolatified because, again, chocolate is not something you can have in Lent.
Right.
And so it's something you have in Easter because, again, vegan, right?
Don't you lose my audience with all that vegan talk.
Right. No, don't. Believe me, I know why vegans are miserable. It's like the unsatisfied meals. Anyway, going on. So we've got to assert our Christian customs, our Christian culture, and we've got to defend it and stand up for it. So I really want to applaud, Nick Tenconi and the other Christians from Disciples of Christ that went and protested outside of that school. And the school itself, and this cuts into why the supermarkets are doing it, is that they're wanting to push a multicultural paradigm. They want to push a multicultural culture, whatever the hell that means. I don't know how you have a multicultural culture, but they understand, or that there's a great deal of them that think that the way that you push multiculturalism is that what you do is you push the majority culture aside, because by pushing the majority culture aside, you create space for other cultures. Because in the world of intersectionality, the majority culture, by its mere existence, is oppressive to minorities, and so they want to push it aside to create space for other cultures to be. Now, as a Christian, I'm fundamentally against this liberal multiculturalism. I think that we need to offer an alternative, which is a multi-ethnic monoculture, which I believe is the more Christian way of doing it, which is that we are very strong as a state and as a nation, committed to our Christian identity, and that people of other ethnicities, because Christianity is not possessed to one ethnicity, but other ethnicities can also celebrate Easter in their own way. So there's an Afro-Caribbean way of celebrating Easter, and there's a white English way of celebrating Easter, and there's a Middle Eastern Chaldean and a Coptic Egyptian way of celebrating Easter, and a Pakistani Christian way of celebrating Easter. And we should celebrate the different ways of celebrating Easter, and that's where you get your multiculturalism from. But it's all within one paradigm, which is a Christian paradigm. Now, that doesn't mean that other people are forced to celebrate Easter. It just means that the state says we're not celebrating anyone else's religion. You do it in private. You want to celebrate Eid, do it in private. You want to celebrate Holi, do it in private. You want to celebrate, you want to mock Yom Kippur, do it in private. But the state is not celebrating these things.
And you wouldn't expect to be able to celebrate as grandly and as freely Easter in, say, Saudi Arabia?
Well, I wouldn't be allowed to. It's actually illegal.
But you wouldn't think that you had the right to?
I wouldn't believe that I have the right to impose
on their culture.
Yeah. But the thing is, in Saudi Arabia, and this is something that just people have got to get their heads around. In Saudi Arabia, open displays of the Christian faith are illegal. Conversion to the Christian faith is punishable by death in Saudi Arabia. Christian migrants from the Philippines and other places in Saudi Arabia are pretty much treated like slaves. This idea that all cultures are equal, or that we're all on the same page, they're all thinking about these issues in the same way, is complete nonsense.
And from your acknowledgement, are multi-faiths equally being driven into the education system, or are there other faiths that are being pushed harder than others?
Well, I think that because Islam is a rising contingent within the population, as you can see from looking at the last two census that were separated by 10 years, Islam grew. I think it went from 4% to 6%. Obviously, and if you look at the demographics of population, nearly 50% of the Muslim population is under 18.
What percentage is that?
Nearly 50% of the Muslim population is under the age of 18. The average age of a Christian is 51, which is an issue. The average age of everybody is around 41. The average age of people of no religion is around 35. The average age of a Muslim is around 27. So you've got a demographic issue there, and that has meant that Islam is being pushed more into our education system, but it's been pushed more into our education system because there's just more Muslim children. Right. And because Muslims use the Benedict community, in some schools there's nearly 100% Muslim children. And the Christianity is being pushed aside because Guardianista kind of liberals think that that's the virtue signalling thing to do. It shows that you're a liberal if you dismiss and push aside Christianity. The rest of us just allow ourselves to be bullied into this. We get browbeat. And what we've basically got to do is we've got to stubbornly defy the liberal elites and stubbornly and defiantly stand up for our Christian heritage and stand up for our Christian beliefs. But I would want to say, and I would want to say though that there's much more fundamental attacks occurring to our Christian heritage than renaming Easter eggs. So an example of that would be the euthanasia bill that's passing through Parliament right now. That is a much more fundamental attack upon our Christian values than changing Easter eggs to holiday eggs. Because the euthanasia bill is saying that life is measured by its pleasure, that life is measured by its functionality. And it's also been driven by a concern to take away off the NHS. And it is a direct attack on the Imago Dei doctrine, which underpins the value of life. That's a much more fundamental attack on our Christian heritage than, say, Ramadan lights, that Khan pushes in imitating Christmas lights, you know. But you see Islam, you see the elites sort of kowtowing more and more to the Islamic community and to the Islamic world.
I'm going to come to that because it's with the Unholy Alliance, which is mind-boggling to think that you've got extreme liberals sort of buddying up with radical Islam.
Yeah.
And the liberals are so naive, they don't realise that the people that they're buddying up with, if they had it their way, would see him dead. Have I got that wrong?
I don't think so. It's Iran all over again. You know, you've got alt-left types saddling up and making alliances and common cause with radical Islamists. And if they were just students of history, if they just looked what happened in Iran, that's exactly what happened in Iran. And the first victims of the Islamic Revolution in Iran were all the alt-left.
I'll give you an example in the UK, actually, that always baffles me. So Brighton, on the south coast, East Sussex, it has always been renowned for being the gay capital of the UK. Yeah. Every 10 square foot, you're going to see a gay guy with dyed blue hair, with nose piercings, and the bottom of his bum cheeks hanging out of his shortcut Levi's.
Okay.
No problem at all. Brighton is flooded with them. It's always been their safe space where they can be accepted and just be who they want to be, which is beautiful. But they're the first to hold up placards saying, refugees welcome.
Yeah.
They know they're not refugees. They know that they're illegal economic migrants. They're not that stupid. But they're welcoming. They're encouraging people to flood our shores with a completely different culture, that where they come from, they would see these gay men with flamboyant piercings with their bum cheeks out. They would see them ended, dead, thrown off a building. Yeah. I mean, and that's not a stereotypical radical Islamic story that I've heard and isn't actually true. But that is a fact.
That is a fact. And I can give you my own example, you know, with the pro-Palestine marches. There was that tragic, hilarious video of Gays for Palestine, a member going to Trafalgar Square to support all these Palestinian Hamas supporting protests. And then he got chased out by Muslims who said that they didn't want, by some Muslims who said that they didn't want him there. And it's just the irony of it. The reason why our elites are kowtowing to Islam, like you've seen it, you know, the fawning over Islam that we've recently seen with the iftar, you know, at St. George's Hall, I think it is, or St. James's Hall, with the king. And then you've got the Prime Minister, you know, sending out messages when they're both ignoring you know, the beginning of Lent and Palm Sunday and stuff like that. And then also the BBC broadcasting, you know, the prayers at the mosque to mark Eid. The reason why the elites are doing that is because they're scared. They can see the demographic shift just like the rest of us. But because they're liberals, they have no commitment to maintain the Christian heritage of the nation. They have no commitment to maintain anything. They are a globalized elite who just look at the UK like a balance sheet. It's all connected to international economics and keeping the economy going. And so, but beyond that, they have zero commitment to any identity, intrinsic identity of the state. And they can see which way the wind is going. They have no desire, they have no ideological reason to try and change it. And so what they're doing is they're trying to placate. They think that if they fawn enough, that it will result in a peaceful, as it were, transition, right? But what they don't understand is that Sharia law, and the reason why I, as a Christian, am completely opposed to Islam, is because for 1400 years, wherever Sharia law has been established, Christians have always been persecuted. So I think with 1400 years of persecution, I have the right as a Christian to go, I don't want that. I don't want to be made a dhimmi. I don't want to be made a second-class citizen in this country. I don't want to live under a different legal code that diminishes my dignity and turns me into and forces me into an apartheid system where I'm judged first as a Christian. You know? But the elites don't see that because in their liberal mind, they have this really naive, blasé rhetoric that all religions teach the same, that all religions have the same values, that all religions are trying to achieve the same thing. And it's just pure ignorance. It's just pure ignorance.
So recently we've had the Manchester Bombers brother who played a significant part in the massacre of a multitude of children.
Yes.
A horrendous terrorist attack. He played his part in that massacre and he should never see the light of day again. He should never be released from his cell for longer than 5 minutes to go to the toilet again. He should be in a straitjacket and a muzzle for the rest of his days. But yet he's in HMP Frankland and he's been given privileges, canteen duty, free to roam on the wing, putting everybody in grave danger. Because if he's prepared to massacre children, what do you think he's prepared to do to a police officer that he will perceive as the person that's keeping him between his cell and the great outdoors? What is your take on what just happened? Because he's stabbed 3 prison officers. Allegedly. I'm glad you said that, get me in trouble. So he's allegedly stabbed 3 police officers multiple times. That's attempted murder, and he's made a makeshift hot oil, doused them in that to scar them, disfigure them forever. How has that been allowed to happen, in your opinion?
The liberal elites have no liberal solution to the Islamists. There's no liberal solution to the Islamists. All they're going to do is keep retrying failed ideas, this idea that we'll talk them out of it. Yeah, we'll just show them how lovely liberalism is, and we'll just win them over with our winsomeness and our retraining. We'll give them new skills, and through that process of learning and education, they'll become enlightened, and they'll just let go of their ideology. That's literally how the Guardianistas think, right? As a Christian, I'm not a liberal, and so I'll come to my own solutions in a second, but that attitude results in the fact that we have an increasing infestation, of Islamists in our prisons who are forming gangs, and they're coming to dominate the gangs. Then you've got the fact that the prison services are being underfunded, and they're also just recruiting. They're not recruiting the right kind of people. You want bruisers to be the ones looking after the prisons. You want people who've got a bit of street intelligence, people who know how to rough it up, people who've been in a difficult situation, people who can't be intimidated. But rather than recruiting those kinds of people, they're recruiting like university students and people that just can't find another job, and little 5'4" women and skinny little scrunts who've just got no backbone, and our prisons have ended up being dominated by these gangs. Because if you're a prisoner serving life, well, what have you got to lose at this point, right? And our liberals leave the prisons to be just like open prisons where everybody gets to mix and mingle and socialize, and it's all part of the idea of re-socializing people, despite the fact that they're now essentially just training camps for criminals, where criminals are sharing experiences and sharing skills and sharing how to do the criminal life. And jihadists are operating in the sense of pushing radical Islam. Prisons need the right kind of recruitment at the right levels with people who are going to bully the bully. And they need to be places of punishment, first and foremost. Right? There should be a restorational path. I believe that. I'm a Christian. I believe in the process of redemption. But the state also has just got to be realistic and just go that some people need to be hanged. Now, you said that the guy in question should be stuck in isolation. I disagree with you. I think he should just be hanged.
I agree with you. But I'm thinking because of the British law, that's an impossibility.
Yeah, we need to change the law.
It's an impossibility. Within the brackets of the law.
Within what's possible now.
He needs to feel the full force. But ideally, we change the law and he swings.
Yeah, and that's what we need. I
wholeheartedly agree.
We need Britain desperately, desperately needs, right? Forget renationalising the economy. Britain desperately needs to renationalise the state. We need people who are running this country from top to bottom, who are actually invested in this country and in the people and the culture and the heritage of this country, and who are willing to defend it with the full might of state resources. But what we have is an internationalized elite that just see the entirety of the United Kingdom as a balance book, as a balance sheet, that see themselves as only really answerable to their internationalized peers, and who have internationalized all of our institutions, and or who live such high ivory tower lives that they don't care really that Islamists are taking over our gangs, that Islamists are raping children. They don't care. And what as Christians, I want to encourage Christians to do, is that the church has an infrastructure from top to bottom in this country. We've got buildings, we've got resources. We need to be a center of an organizational center for a galvanizing a legal democratic resistance to the liberal establishment. And we need another bloodless revolution in this country. We need a legal revolution where we militantly, institution by institution, constituency by constituency, and job by job, office by office, drive the liberals out of the state and replace them with people who actually care about what's happening in this country and what is happening to the people of this country and to the historical identity of this country. And that's the fundamental difference between a Christian state and a liberal state, is a liberal state has no care about the historical identity of a nation, whereas a Christian state is fully committed to its own Christian historical identity.
It's amazing how the liberals are perceived to be the good people, the intellectual people, the forgiving people, the understanding people. And I used to think that when I was young. I used to think, people that read The Guardian were the intellects, and, they're the people that push things forward, and they're the ones that are full of love and joy. They're the nurses, the doctors. But the more I step back and look at the bigger picture, I think there's evil within liberalism. In fact, I think liberalism is riddled with evil.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally. Let me just read to you, right? So I'm going to read from a book called Reliance of the Traveller. So this is a book of Islamic fiqh, right? That's a fiqh is a way that you do Islamic law. So it's a bunch of legal opinions.
Okay.
And then a Muslim judge, before he makes a Islamic judgment in a Sharia court, would look at books like this to help inform his decision-making process, right? And this is from a legal school called the Shafi school, right, which is one of 4 main legal schools within the Islamic tradition, right? This is how it says, in an Islamic state, Christians should be treated, right? So this is saying how I should be treated as a Christian. By the way, as an atheist, as an out-and-out atheist, you get a far worse deal than me.
I'll just lie.
Yeah, just say you're a Christian, right? Listen to what it says, right? This is in section 11.4. The minimum non-Muslim poll tax is 1 dinar, or 4,235 grams of gold per person per year. The maximum is whatever both sides agree upon, right? So the maximum means that it could be up to 50%, it could be 60%, it could be 70%, right? There's no limit. So, and Muslim apologists will often say, well, but the jizya tax, which is what we're talking about here, is just equivalent to the zakat. But the point is the zakat is capped at 2.5%, I think, whereas jizya could be any amount, right? Goes on. It is collected in leniency and politeness, which this is a modern book, by the way, so I'm not reading some ancient medieval book. This is a modern book. This is an improvement on the past. It goes, as are all debts, and is levied on women, children, and is not levied on women, children, or the insane. Such non-Muslims subjects are obliged to comply with Islamic rules and pertain to the safety and indemnity of life, reputation, and property. In addition, they are distinguished from Muslims in dress, wearing a wide cloth belt. So in other words, as a Christian, walking down the street, I have to wear certain clothes that identify me as a Christian. Where have you heard that before? So this is saying that Christians have to be identified by the way that they dress.
Is that to make them an easy target?
It would result in that, wouldn't it? It would result in that. Yeah? Means that anyone who's an Islamic radical who hates Christians would be able to spot all the Christians by the way that they're dressed. Goes on. Christians must keep to the side of the street. As in, we have to walk where the gully is. We have to walk where the water collects. You have to keep to the side of the street. This is how Christians would be treated in an Islamic system. Imagine if I started a political party and I said that we were going to pass a law that said that Muslims have to keep to the side of the street. They have to wear clothes that distinguish them as Muslims. And that, as it says here, they may not build higher or as high as Muslim buildings, though if they acquire a tall house, it is not raised. So in other words, Christians can't build a building that's higher than a Muslim building. Not a church, not a house. You've got to have a lower building. Why would you do that? What are you trying to point out by doing that?
That's a superiority thing.
Yeah, one is inferior, one is superior. You're the Christian, you're inferior. Goes on and says that they are forbidden, Christians are forbidden to openly display wine or pork, to ring church bells, or to display crosses. Imagine I started a political party that said that Muslims can't do the Adhan, they can't pray in the street, in fact, they can't do any display of their faith publicly.
So that's a major contradiction. Well, that's hypocrisy.
It's apartheid. We're talking about a religious apartheid here. And I've got other examples I can give you. It says openly that they cannot recite the Torah or the Evangel aloud or make public display of funerals and feast days. So under Islamic law, Christians can't publicly celebrate Easter. We can't publicly celebrate Christmas. It goes on. They are forbidden to build new churches. Right? Now, this isn't theory, Liam. Christians in Egypt are suffering under this right now. Christians in Iraq are suffering under this right now. Christians in Pakistan are suffering under this right now. They're living in apartheid systems, and they have for centuries. And yet the liberal Guardianista will tell me that I'm problematic because I don't want to live like this.
So you see what you've just read to me there? Will that be playing a part in the suppression of Easter in the supermarket and the suppression of Easter in that school that we spoke about? Is this the beginning of complete suppression of Christianity? Is there a chance we could be living under Sharia law one day? Is there a chance that could happen?
The future is not determined, and I think it's one of multiple possible futures. It's one horizon. You know, it's like we've arrived over the top of the hill and we can see that one horizon is that way, an Islamic state. One horizon is that way, which is something else, like a technocracy, you know, run by technocrats. One horizon is something else, you know, and I would say that on a distant horizon, we now see the possibility of a Christian state, you know, because Christian states are not completely outside of the realms of possibility. Look at what's going off in America right now. Look at what's happening in Hungary. Look at what's happening in Poland. Look at what's happening in Slovenia, Slovakia. Look at what's happening in Romania, Serbia. You know, so Christian states are around. But in terms of the possibility of an Islamic state, it's definitely on the horizon. The demographic shift, the demographic bomb that we're all sitting on, at some point is going to cash out. And if we don't do something, that will move us in that direction. But it's not certain, because there's a difference between being a Muslim majority country and being as an Islamic state. They're not the same thing. Yeah? You can be a Muslim majority country and not be an Islamic state. If you want an example of that, look at Tunisia. Pretty much, it's a Muslim majority country, but they're not an Islamic state. In fact, they're the very opposite of Islamic state. Most of the Muslims there don't even practice Islam. So, Turkey's another example, though that's kind of moved in an Islamic state direction. But up until recently, up until Erdogan, that was Muslim majority, but it wasn't an Islamic state. So these two things are different. But one of the dangers is that if we became a Muslim majority country, that the Islamist supremacist kind of ideology becomes the main ideology amongst the Muslims, and then you could have an Islamic state, as has happened in parts of Nigeria. And so it is there. It's on the horizon, but by no means is it certain. It is not a guaranteed future.
What did happen, just in case people don't know?
Right. So 20 years ago, I remember speaking to a Nigerian Christian, and she was so confident that Islam would never come south. It was always a thing stuck in the north of Nigeria. And I remember debating with her ferociously. But she was, bombastic and confident, full of life, full of energy, as Nigerians are, and loud and charismatic. But she just wouldn't deal with facts. And I remember that conversation because I've always been interested in what's been happening in Nigeria and what has happened in Nigeria. And 20 years later, we now see Fulani herdsmen and Boko Haram pushing down into the central plateau of Nigeria. They've pushed down, they've butchered and slaughtered their way through the north, and now they're pushing into the central part of Nigeria. There's at least, I believe, 3 parts of the Nigerian Federation where Sharia law is being implemented. There's widespread persecution of Christians in northern Nigeria. They're being killed in their tens of thousands, Liam. The world doesn't care.
The world doesn't know.
The world doesn't want to know. It's not like there aren't plenty of evidence out there. If the world wanted to, if the Western liberal Guardianista media wanted to put a spotlight on it, they could. They're making a deliberate choice not to. I mean, they do it with Palestine and Israel. But the reason why they're not focusing on the story in northern Nigeria is because it doesn't fit the liberal narrative. In the liberal narrative, Muslims don't persecute Christians. In reality, there isn't a single Muslim majority country anywhere in the world where Christians are not being persecuted. And so I would say you need to take this seriously, because it doesn't matter whether you believe that we should be playing chess with these Islamists. It doesn't matter whether you believe that you're in competition with these Islamists. They see themselves as playing chess against you. They see themselves in competition with you. They want to win. And if you don't accept that reality, they will. Because if someone's trying to outsmart you and get advantage over you, and you're there saying to yourself, well, no, that's not happening. Well, you're giving them an open field, aren't you?
So Keir Starmer knows that that's going on in Nigeria. I mean, it's his job to know. He's the Prime Minister of the UK, sadly. So with that knowledge in mind, at the moment he's trying to pass Islamophobia laws to the point he's actually going to change the name of Islamophobia because there is no such thing as an irrational fear of an ideology. So with that information in mind, he knows the power and how dominant and the takeover force, which is Islam.
Yeah.
Certainly the radical leg, and you've mentioned Islamists, and it's important for people to know that you're not talking about Muslims, you're talking about radical Muslims.
Yes,
There's a big difference.
Good
and
point.
I think some people, they just hear Islam in a word and think you're talking about all Muslims.
Yeah,
you're
definitely not.
My understanding is you are describing radical, militant Islam.
Yeah.
Islamists that are prepared to kill, maim and torture for political gain.
But also those that are willing to use democratic means to the same establishment of Sharia law.
Right.
So I include those as Islamists.
Okay.
So if someone is wanting to establish Sharia law...
Because they know what they're buying into.
Yeah. Right? Not someone who not someone who practices Islam as a cultural expression, circumcisions, weddings and funerals, and abstains from pork and fasts during Ramadan, but beyond that is not actually that bothered about what other people do. I'm talking about people who want to bring Sharia law on to people like me and you.
Okay, so do you
Those are Islamists, and not all of them are violent.
No, it is important to say that, because I'm listening to you talk about Christianity, and I'm listening to you talk about Islam.
Yeah.
I don't believe in either, but I trust that you are very, very wise, and I know that you've studied both of these religions, so I'm taking it all at face value, so I can't be accused of being biased, but I also know from my research that one religion is certainly far more dangerous than the other. So what I'm thinking is, if Keir Starmer knows...
I'm listening. Go on.
...what's going on...
Yep.
And yet he's trying to bring in laws to suppress people criticising Islam.
Yeah.
Other than being a liberal elite, what is his motive for that? Why is he trying to create laws that basically fear you into a corner where you're too scared to talk about Islam and the problems that come with radical Islam? Because it's much of a much. Whether I can imagine down the line, whether you're talking about Islamists or Muslims, he's going to tie it all into the same package and say that's Islamophobia.
Yeah, someone like Sir Keir Starmer has the facts. He knows about the persecution, but it's the way that he interprets the facts. His liberal ideology means that he cannot link all these many examples of Christians being persecuted in the entirety of the Islamic world to Islam. In his mind, there's no connection there. And the reason why there's no connection there is because he's an ignoramus, pretty much like all the Guardianistas. I've literally just read to you from a book of Islamic law how Christians are to be treated. They've got to wear special clothes so they can be identified. They can't build new churches. They have to have buildings that are lower than Muslim buildings. They can't have open displays of their religion. Let me give you another example. In terms of the indemnity that is paid for killing someone under Sharia law, right? This is what it says. The indemnity for the death or injury of a woman is one half of the indemnity paid for a man. The indemnity paid for the death of a Jew or a Christian is 1/3 of the indemnity paid for a Muslim. So it's literally saying that the value of the life of a Christian or a Jew, and a woman for that matter, is less than that of a Muslim. Right? So ignoramuses like Sir Keir Starmer say that when I quote literally the books that are being published by Al-Azhar University in Egypt, that is a book read by Islamic judges of the madhab, the Shafi madhab, people like Sir Keir Starmer, they haven't got a clue about any of this. Because what they do is they go up to the first Muslim that they meet and they go, I just watched this video where so-and-so said such and such. And then the Muslim instinctively just goes, no, that's not true. And then he goes, oh, thanks, I'm so relieved. Now I know that the world makes sense again. Clearly he's just some right-wing extremist, right? But I'm reading their books.
Is Keir Starmer ignorant, or is...
He's ideologically blind.
Is Keir Starmer anti-Christian?
I don't think he's anti-Christian in the sense... I don't think he sees himself as anti-Christian. But his liberal ideology is anti-Christian. You know, Sir Keir Starmer is of the type that Trudeau is. And in Trudeau's Canada, because of a anti-Christian lie that was spread in the liberal media, 100 churches have been burnt down and attacked in Canada, right? And Trudeau's response to this was, well, you know, I think it's wrong, but it's understandable. Right? Imagine if 100 mosques had been burnt down in Canada.
Is that hypothetical, or did he actually say that?
He actually said that.
Oh, that's outrageous.
He actually said that. Christophobia gets a soft pass in liberal circles. It gets a soft pass. And Keir Starmer will be of that mindset. So he will hear something that's Christophobic and it will just go under his radar.
Is that ignorance in the sense of they believe Christianity is the most dominant, powerful religion, and therefore the fringe religions are kind of, you've got to treat them as if they're smaller than you, and you'd feel like a bully if you was to attack them? Is that their thinking? Is it arrogance?
I think that's one of the ingredients to their thinking. So liberals often confuse race and religion. So they'll talk about Christianity as if it's a white man's religion. They'll talk about Islam as if it is a ethnicity. And so obviously in the liberal paradigm...
And people buy into that crap.
Yeah, and the worst thing that you can be as a liberal is a racist. So if you've then identified that Islam is a race, therefore Islamophobia is a form of racism, well, that is obviously the worst thing that you can be. And so we have to fight that at all costs because it's racism. Now, the fact that even Muslims will tell you Islam is not a race, the liberals never get that message. Like, Muslims are telling them it's not a race. Christians are telling them. Everyone is telling the liberals it's not a race, but yet they're still thinking that it is.
Is that purposefully done?
No, it's because they're liberals. It's their worldview. It's because in their minds there isn't a religious identity.
Right.
For a liberal, a religion is just a hobby. Right? That's how they think of it. They just think it's something you do on a Sunday. It's like, and everyone is just an individual. That there isn't deep-rooted historical, cultural, normative values. Though this intersectionality is breaking even that idea up. And so when I quote this, they'll just dismiss it, and they'll say, "Well, it's all down to the individual." And so when a radical Muslim seeks to impose this, they'll just they won't connect the dot and say, oh, he's actually doing something Islamic. They'll just go, no, he's a bad Muslim. Right? Now, there are lots of good Muslims, I hasten to add. There are lots of good Muslims. I've befriended them. I've dated them. Like, I grew up with them. There are lots of Muslims who are lovely, warm human beings. But they're not lovely, warm human beings because they're taking this seriously. Right. They're lovely, warm human beings despite this. Yeah? This book literally says you can marry prepubescent children. This book, I'll continue. The indemnity paid for Zoroastrians is 1/15 of that of a Muslim. When a miscarriage results from someone having struck the stomach or a pregnant woman, the indemnity for the fetus is a male or female slave worth 1/20th of the indemnity payable for killing the fetus father, or 1/10th. So it's talking about institutionalized slavery. Now, if I ask a liberal, are you against slavery? They're going to say yes. If I ask a liberal, are you against apartheid? They'll say yes. Then if I say, are you therefore against Islamic slavery and Islamic apartheid? The liberal will go, ooh, but what about Christian slavery? What about the Crusades?
Oh, the whataboutists.
Yeah.
They're the worst.
Well, because the thing is they can't confront this. Because if they start to confront this, it basically breaks the liberal narrative. And so people like Sir Keir Starmer are ideologically blind. They're not ignorant. It's just that when they receive the facts and the evidence, it's how they interpret the facts and the evidence. And they interpret it in such a way that Islam is never the cause of the problem.
Well, with that in mind then, and taking into consideration these new Islamophobia laws that are trying to be pushed through, you speak against Islamists quite rigorously. Do you fear that you could possibly be arrested and incarcerated one day for your freedom of speech and views and expression?
I think it's becoming more likely. And that is not a prospect that I look forward to, because I'll definitely get killed in prison, because it's run by Muslim prison. It's run by Muslim prison gangs, and so. But I think it is definitely increasingly likely, and I don't think people appreciate just how dangerous this Labour government is to the idea of freedom of speech.
Explain to people in layman's terms just how dangerous.
Well, the thing is, if you pass, it depends on the definition of Islamophobia. the working definition that they had, and I don't know if they're going to stick to it, is that Islamophobia is a form of racism that is connected to hostility to expressions of Muslimness. What the hell's Muslimness? Could be anything. You know, do you not like the fact that the Adani's being blasted in a megaphone from a megaphone into your home? Well, that's Islamophobia. Do you speak out against women wearing the burqa? Well, that's Islamophobia. Do you want to see meat clearly labelled as halal or not be force-fed halal meat in a hospital? That's Islamophobia. That definition is so problematic, it will be weaponized almost immediately. And a law that can be weaponized by one party over another is not a good law. It's not a sound law. And what it does is it creates blasphemy laws within this country, Islamic blasphemy laws. We've already seen almost blasphemy being instituted in this country by the back door. You know, people are being arrested for burning Qurans that they own. That young boy and his mother that were dragged along to the mosque by the police so that they had to give a public apology because in a fight a little lad dropped a Quran and it got scuffed. Or the teacher in Batley and Spen that's been in hiding for years, abandoned by Labour, abandoned by the trade unions, because he tried to teach a lesson on blasphemy in which he showed insulting images of Muhammad, despite the fact that he warned the kids and said that they didn't have to be there if they didn't want to be there. You know, so we've got this institutionalization of blasphemy by the elites because of their fear of what the Muslim community. And we've also got the fact that the Labour Party wants to bring in this law that will just be another dampening down on speech. I mean, this is the Labour Party that wants to create this law that says that, pub landlords and cafe owners and restaurant owners will have to ask people to stop conversations if the waiters or the waitresses find those conversations insulting. Basically, what's happening is as the elites are losing control of the narrative, as the elites are losing the public debate, as they are losing the argument in the public sphere, what they're doing is they're basically shutting down the people that are winning the argument. And they're finding ways to do that, right? The evidence that Islam is bad for Christians is really easy for me to demonstrate, right? Liberals can't argue with me on that. And since they're going to lose that debate, all they've got is the ability to shut me up. And that's dangerous for us because if we lose the right to speak freely, then we can't maintain any of our other rights. If we fight ferociously to defend one right, it must be the right to freedom of speech. Yeah? To freely critique. Now, if you remember at our Christmas special, I defended the idea of blasphemy laws. And I maintain that. But I don't think Christianity should be beyond critique. I don't think the church should be beyond critique. Right? There's a difference between things that are blasphemous and things that are critical. If we lose the ability to discuss tough questions in our society, it's harmful for democracy. It also means that whole avenues of thought get shut down for us. Like, we all know that there's a growing problem of Islamization and Islamists in the UK. Like in the prisons, for instance. Like the government has literally lost control of the prisons. Or some prisons. But if we can't even talk about that, how are we going to start dealing with the solutions? If we can't all talk about the problems in society, then that means that only certain elites do. And then you're not living in a democracy anymore. And so I want to encourage people, everybody, that they absolutely must fight this pushing of an Islamophobia law. You must fight it with every legal means and to the fullness of your might. Because if this law passes, it will open up, it'll be the thin end of a wedge that will start opening up other aspects of Islamization that you won't then be able to resist because you won't be able to talk about it because you'll be accused of Islamophobia if you do and be thrown in prison. That this Labour government has got to go. Got to go.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's my opinion, that Keir Starmer is definitely a sociopath, and I'm debating whether he's a psychopath or not. For me, the jury is still out, and I know that's strong, but if you really, really get under the bonnet of his mindset and the things he's actually done, it's pretty ruthless. It's pretty callous, and like he's clearly lacking empathy, and he clearly does things for virtue as opposed to purpose. And he's certainly not for the betterment of you and me.
No, he's for the betterment of his liberal internationalist community.
Lucy Connolly, Conservative MP's wife, who's now in jail. I think she got 18 months for a tweet that she put out. Now, I don't remember the tweet word for word, but I remember the important parts of the tweet, which I'll remind the people watching and listening. Because when you put the question out on X, for example, should Lucy Connolly be released from jail? It's amazing how many people say no, she incited violence, it led to X, Y, and Z, she belongs in jail. Now, it brings me back to the actual crime itself. And what she said was, to the tune of, you can do X, Y, and Z for all I care. I've had enough. What she didn't say was, I want you all to go and do X, Y, and Z. I've read that tweet time and time again. What could they have possibly jailed her for? Yes, what she said she doesn't care about isn't great, but she hasn't encouraged it. So what's your take on that? Should Lucy Connolly be in prison? And she's been denied visiting rights to her daughter as well.
So a couple of points. Let's flip it, and let's say a Muslim, an Islamic radical, had said something inciting something in the reverse direction. Would we want them to be punished? I certainly would. And so, but I believe in equality under the law. I believe everyone should be treated equally under the law, which is very different from Islamic law, which is why I'm so against it, because it literally is an apartheid system. And it's also why I'm against progressive politics, because progressive politics and intersectionality creates this idea of different laws for different kinds of people. And as a Christian white man, I am the lowest of the low, right? And we see that developing in our legal system. There was recently this idea of creating different sentencing structures and different sentencing systems dependent upon your ethnicity. Which was retracted last minute. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, yes.
Right.
Robert Jenrick made a big thing about it. I think he took the credit for them not passing it.
Yeah, and rightly so.
At the 13th hour.
Rightly so. Robert Jenrick is doing a stellar job. Him and Rupert Lowe, it's just a shame that they're not both in the Reform Party and that, and that Nigel could cope with other big figures in the Reform Party. But coming back to the topic. So I believe in equality under the law. She did clearly do something wrong.
But what did she do wrong?
In terms of the context in which she was saying what she was saying, the argument is that it's interpreted as encouraging violence. Inciting violence should be a crime, but there needs to be clear evidence of intent. And it seems to me that what's happening is it's how it's interpreted by someone else. It's subjectively interpreted by someone else, regardless of your intent.
That's my concern.
Yeah, that's my concern as well. And so, I do believe that this law is problematic, but I believe that everyone has to be treated equally under that law. And so I think when you weigh up whether she intended to incite violence, it's going to come clearly out as a not guilty, right? My bigger issue around this whole question is that there are people that have done far worse than this lady who are not in prison, who have been spared prison. People have looked at children being raped and they're not in prison.
Let's remind people that was Hugh Edwards.
Yeah. There are people who have literally gone out and attacked people with machetes and otherwise done physical harm to people and have got less sentences. And the concern around this case is the way that it was so politicized by the Labour Party and by the way it was like, we're going to crack down on the far right and we're going to hammer the far right. And so they just swept up anyone that they could to create this narrative of there's this dangerous far right that we've got to deal with, and look at all these examples. Under the strictest interpretation of the law as it is, which is imperfectly done, I think that the prosecution had grounds and the guilty verdict had grounds, but the sentencing is extreme. Yeah? I think that law is itself imperfect and it needs to be reformed in a way that meant that she would not have been found guilty, right? But the question is, under the current law, did she commit something that could be called a crime? And I think that, yeah, the guilty verdict under the current imperfect law had some grounds. The sentencing, though, for me, I have slowly lost my respect for the courts in this country over the last year. Because of these blatant imbalances in sentencing for different crimes. Like there was that other guy that he stuck up these little stickers saying it's okay to be white. I don't agree with that kind of ideology. You know, I don't even think of myself as white. I think of myself as Anglo-Saxon. So I don't agree with anything of that ideology. But to chuck a man like that in prison for that is just ridiculous, especially when you're letting out murderers and people that are attacking people with machetes, and you're sparing people for violent crimes prison on account or violent sexual crimes or the attempt to carry out sexual crimes against minors, and you're letting them off prison because they didn't understand that having sex with children was wrong in this country. Our courts are really doing harm to the respect that the people have to the very idea of the justice of the courts. And it will, and for me, it's already reached this point, but I think it will increasingly become prevalent in our culture where we just don't respect the courts. And so when they find someone guilty of something, we'll get to a point where we just go, well, actually, he's a political prisoner. And I think for me, I've already reached that point. I think we have political prisoners in the UK.
Same.
You know, and that means that I don't take the courts. I take the courts very seriously in the sense that I know they can harm me, but I don't take them seriously in the sense of I see them as a moral authority. And I think that's going to be increasingly become an attitude in the UK. And that's really dangerous for democracy. That's really dangerous for the state. If the general population doesn't respect the moral authority of the court, because the moral authority of the court has been undermined by politicized, political activist judges, then it hammers at the very foundations of a stable society. Because eventually this sense of incredulousness and this sense of injustice starts to rise up in the hearts of the people. And that's one of the ingredients you've got for social strife.
So with all this taken into serious consideration, new laws that are being put through, political prisoners, there's a very good chance you could end up going to jail. You understand that? I've asked you, you've said that you know that there's a chance you could end up in jail, and then you think it's probable that if that happened, you would end up dead, murdered. With all that in mind, are you still going to continue to speak out?
Well, the thing is, as a Christian, firstly, I know that this life is not the sum total of existence. And my hope is in the resurrection, back to the Easter story. My confidence is in the resurrection. I know that the victory has already been won by my Lord Jesus Christ. I know that his kingdom will continue to advance. Whatever happens to the United Kingdom, whatever happens to England, the church is still going to be here. The church will survive. And the church will, even if it's eliminated from the land for a time, it will return. You know, just as we've done in other places, you know. And so for me, the measure of life is not just about consequences in this world, but ultimately it's about the judgment that is to come. And when I stand before the throne of my Lord, will he say to me, good and faithful servant, enter into my Father's rest? Or will he say to me, depart from me, you worker of iniquity, I never knew you? And so for me, that is far more important than whether I live another 20 years or whether I die under this Labour government. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen. I'm just saying that under this current government, it has an increased possibility. And if that law gets passed, it has an increased possibility again, right? But what probability that is, that's for God to know. But my point is, as a Christian, my measure of life's value, its worth, and its destiny is measured by calculations that are not just entirely about this world. It's about the next. And my confidence in the next because of the resurrection. And Christ commands me to love my brothers and sisters, and he commands me to love my neighbor. And I don't want to live under Sharia law for me. That means that because I see it as evil, and I will make that argument to anyone who wants to debate me on it. So just as a general out there, if there's anyone who's watching this, liberal, progressive, Muslim, who wants to argue that Islamic law is not evil, that it is not unjust.
Is there anyone in particular that you'd like to debate?
Mohammed Hijab, Ali Dawa, all the people that run from me at Speaker's Corner. I'll debate any of those. And we'll debate whether Islam is a just system, or whether it's good for Christians. Now, the point is, because I don't want that for me, it means that I also shouldn't want it for you. And I shouldn't want it for my brothers and sisters in the church. And if you love someone, you throw yourself to the front of the fight to protect the people you love. And so this is the responsibility of all Christian men, to throw themselves to the front of the fight to protect the whole of our society from Sharia law. And that means, and there can be no victory without sacrifice. There can be no victory without the willing to suffer loss. Because if you're looking for some easy path to victory, if you're looking for some costless win, as unfortunately a lot of soy Christians are, you're going to lose.
Soy Christians?
Yeah, there's a lot of soy Christians out there. A lot of soy Christians who they're the kind of comfortable middle-class Christians who just want a nice little club that involves no real sacrifice, that involves no real conflict, right? And the thing is, I don't want anyone, I don't want Muslims to suffer under Sharia law. Look at those poor women in Afghanistan, right? My heart breaks for them. Iran, yeah. People will accuse me of hating Muslims. My heart breaks for the women of Afghanistan. They're all Muslim, but my heart breaks for them, for the tragedy of what is occurring to them because of the Taliban's interpretation of Sharia law, where literally women now are just being locked in their homes. Can't speak, can't be seen, can't be heard, can't be educated. In Iran, where you've had all these women who have been shot and killed because they just didn't want to wear a headscarf. Like, my heart breaks for them.
It does. Mine does.
Yeah, but that's the point. For anyone that wants evidence, this is not about hating Muslims. I don't want anyone to be the victim of Sharia law.
It's more about loving people. In fact, it's got nothing to do with hate at all.
Exactly.
It's all to do with love.
It is. And the thing is, if you love someone, you're going to want the best for them. Since Sharia law is not the best for anybody, anyone who loves anybody will oppose Sharia law. If you're against slavery, you'll oppose Sharia law. If you're against child marriage, you'll oppose Sharia law. If you're against apartheid systems, you'll oppose Sharia law. If you're against the idea of killing people for making a religious choice, you're against Sharia law. Like, I could go on with many more examples. Yeah. If you're against these kinds of things, whether you want to be or not, you're on my side. The question is whether you've just got the balls and the backbone to admit it to yourself and get involved, right? I don't want to see anyone as a slave. Sharia law permits institutionalized slavery as a matter of course. You know, I don't want to see women betrayed in adulterous secret marriages, but misya marriages permit you to do exactly that. And there's been so many women that I know about who have suffered because of a polygamous marriage and because of polygamous secret marriages, which are all legal under Sharia law.
Well, let me just move on from there.
So that's why I'm opposed to it, and that's my reasoning. Sorry, I could go on.
No, yeah. I know. There's two more things I want to cover. Speaker's Corner.
Yep.
So the last time we spoke, there was a growing concern that Islamists were infiltrating Speaker's Corner, and the amount of Muslims was on the rise. And I mean, I've seen you on the internet debating 4, 5, 6 of them at once. So last time we spoke, there was an influx. There's been death threats. There's been all sorts going on there that will never ever get printed, which if anybody is interested, actually go and watch our part 1, which is from just
Christmas.
before Christmas. It was our Christmas special. So yeah, anything else you want to find out about Bob, because it was a completely different interview, please go and watch part 1 and follow him on X as well, Bob the Builder. So is it still the same at Speaker's Corner now as it was back then? Because I saw something that made me think Speaker's Corner is changing slightly.
Yeah, I have noticed that the police seem to be getting a bit more involved, which I welcome. That they seem to be engaging more, and they seem to be stepping in more and dealing with stuff more. They could still be stronger and better, but there's been an improvement, and I'm grateful to the police for that. But, you know, just last Sunday, a Muslim assaulted a Christian, pushed him off the ladder, and the police had a word with him. They took him to one side. They had a word with him, but they still let him just walk off, right? We intellectually, the Muslims at Speaker's Corner have been beaten, and everybody knows that they've been beaten. But also, there's a whole bunch of allegations now that are swirling around about different key figures within the Dawah gang. Now, I'm not saying that any of these allegations are true. I don't know whether they're true or not. I'm not making comment on that. But, you know, there's people that have been, and these are all in the public domain already. So I'm not making the allegation. I'm not saying that the allegation is true. And I just pray to God that whatever is just and right comes about, and any wronged party receives justice, whoever that is, whether it's the accused or whether it's the accuser. But you've got, you know, people being accused of fraudulently using money that they've raised. You've got people accused of having secret affairs on their wives. And these are big characters within the Islamic world, within the Dawah gang. And I think that that's really harmed their work. And, you know, just last Sunday, an ex-Muslim who left Islam became a Christian, you know, in the park. So what we're seeing in a combination, because more of the right kind of Christians are coming to the corner, because the police are doing a better job, and because of the implosion of the Dawah gang that's been at that corner, in terms of they're now just in turmoil within their own internal strife, the corner has become a slightly more pleasant a place. It's become better. You know, it's become a nicer environment. Now, how long that lasts, I don't know. Whether it will be maintained, I haven't got a clue. But for now, there is definitely a change in the environment.
And you're enjoying it?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, like I go to Speaker's Corner because I like talking to Muslims, and unfortunately, there's you know, Muslims don't want to debate me now, and so I've ended up speaking to more people like yourself, you know, people of goodwill, sympathetic to the Christian faith, not yet Christian, lots of people who are patriots, and also lots of new Christians.
I see what you've done there.
What?
Not yet Christian.
Not yet Christian. Soon. But the point is the corner is a cultural jewel. It is something that could be really precious in the UK. Literally, people come from around the world to go to Speaker's Corner. If it was policed properly, if it was cultivated properly, it could be a place known throughout the world for high levels of intellectual debate. People like Douglas Murray could be coming to Speaker's Corner to give speeches. Think of another public speaker like any scholar. People, scientists could be coming to give talks at Speaker's Corner. If it was properly policed and properly cultivated, Speaker's Corner could become this international jewel of public free speech and debate. Think we haven't got any visionaries in government who like Sadiq Khan hasn't got the vision for that, right? And I think he hasn't got the vision for that because he knows that Speaker's Corner is a place where Islam gets exposed. But if he cared about London, if he cared about London's reputation, well, this is a place where London is represented on the world stage. You could have, if it was done right, Speaker's Corner could be the place. Karl Marx once went to Speaker's Corner to give a speech. Like you could have intellects from around the world coming to Speaker's Corner to debate and talk and interact with people if it was done right.
I love watching people like you. I mean, I admire and respect you hugely for what you do. I mean, you have got a testicular fortitude.
Yeah, those were my words. I was going to use those words myself.
Yeah. Well, I already stole your muscular Christianity, so I thought I'd get another one in there while I had the opportunity before I ask you the final thing that I want. It's more of a favour than a question. It's more of me asking you for something. So, of late, there's a lot of injustice. There's a lot of people struggling. There's political prisoners. We've got Lucy Connolly sat in a jail cell, which will be, completely out of her comfort zone.
Yep.
We had Peter Lynch that got sent to jail when he should never, ever have been jailed.
Agreed.
He done nothing wrong. He did not break the law, and he ended up taking his own life, and his family are going to have to live with that for the rest of their lives.
Yep.
We've got Tommy Robinson sat in solitary confinement for a civil matter. That should be happening. And these are the people that we know because they're in the headlines. There's also millions of people that are struggling out there. There's going to be...
And there's hundreds of extra prisoners that haven't made it to the headlines.
Yeah, and that we don't know about.
Yeah.
But we know there's a lot of people sat somewhere where they shouldn't be right now, and there's a lot of people suffering, and there's a lot of misery. So anyone that's watching this because they get a little bit of comfort, whatever it may be, they tune into Clock Out. It's normally what we all do. What message of hope would you give them? But I'd like you to say a prayer for them out loud so I can hear it as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Happy with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk about the message and then I'll finish with the prayer. How about that?
Perfect.
So, Christ said, be of good courage, for I have overcome the world. And we're told that greater is he that is in us than is in the world. The point of Easter is that it is a place where, as Christians, we place our hope. Christ has conquered the sin, the world, and the devil. And we Christians are the invasion of the future. And I would say to people who are struggling, who are in dark places, who emotionally or psychologically or are in dark circumstances, for those political prisoners, and for others that are suffering hard times because we've been governed by soft men, is to fix your eyes on Jesus, who is the author and the perfecter of our faith, and to look upon his resurrection in the knowledge that the victory is already won, to begin to rise above your circumstances, to strengthen your inner man, to strengthen your inner woman in the knowledge and the conviction that God has demonstrated through his Son, that he has embraced you in your circumstances, that he has suffered with you on that cross. He suffered with you in your circumstances, and that he intends and desires to bring you to a newness of life and to a new life. And that when you grasp hold of that reality, no matter how dark the prison, you will be free. No matter how deep and painful the circumstances, you will be healed. No matter what array of enemies are beset against you, you will be victorious. Look to Christ, place your hope in him, and then push forward. And don't give up. And so now I'll pray. Almighty God and Father of all mankind, you have created us from dust, and from dust you have called us forward to embody the image of yourself here on earth. And in our failings, Lord, we failed to uphold that image. But through your Son, you have restored it within us, and you have set us free from the dominions and principalities and powers of this dark world. You have conquered the god of this world, Satan, and you have established your kingdom. And so I pray, Father, that by the grace of your Holy Spirit, you will strengthen and enlighten, encourage and heal, embolden and instill virtue upon all those that look to you as their hope, and all those that look to your Son for victory. I pray, Lord, that you bless and strengthen them, that you encourage them, that you protect them upon all sides, and that you secure their heart within the firm foundation and upon the firm foundation of your Son, that they might live and work to your praise and glory. Send them out, Lord, in the power of your Spirit, to live and work to your praise and glory as a living sacrifice, as a holy priest, to bring your kingdom from heaven to earth. We ask all this in the name of our Lord and Saviour, your Son, our Lord, Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen. Bob, I'd like to invite you to come back towards the end of the year for our Christmas special.
It would be a pleasure.
Well, until then, good health, thank you, and God bless.
God bless. Peace be with you.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.